Okay, so you've handed us
Yeah.
a collection of news articles and analysis pieces, even some social media chatter, and it all points to a pretty intense week in global affairs. I mean, it feels like headlines are made of this, right? Iranian officials making cryptic threats, whispers of a possible nuclear test, Israel on edge. Where do we even begin with all of this?
I think what's really striking here is how quickly things have escalated. We've moved from speculation about Iran's nuclear capabilities to what looks like, a major move on their part. And it's like watching decades of simmering tensions just suddenly boil over.
Right. And at the heart of all of this is this potential nuclear event in Iran, right?
Yeah.
And the sources that you provided, particularly that seismic data analysis from, I think it was an independent lab in Norway,
Right.
that suggests that this wasn't your average earthquake.
Yeah, exactly. A 4.6 magnitude tremor near a known Iranian military facility. That's definitely going to raise some eyebrows, right? But then you look closer, when you look at the type of seismic waves, that sharp initial spike followed by the rapid drop-off, it's a lot more consistent with an underground explosion than with a natural seismic event.
Okay.
And then you add in the lack of aftershocks. That's another red flag.
So this isn't something that you could easily brush off as, say, a mining accident.
Not a chance. It lines up with what we know about underground nuclear tests. Sudden release of energy in a very contained space. And the timing. I mean, this comes right after those statements from Iranian officials about revising their nuclear stance. That's pretty hard to ignore that potential connection.
Okay, so let's talk about those statements. A weapon never before seen, and aimed at Israel, no less.
Is this just bluster? Or could it be something more? How worried should we be? Well, I mean, it's definitely meant to send a message, but dismissing it as mere rhetoric, that would be a mistake. Remember, Iran has been pretty vocal about their desire for regional influence and their view of Israel as a threat. So this new development, if it is in fact a successful nuclear test, it changes the balance of power significantly.
And this all ties into the already very tense relationship between Israel and Iran, right? I mean, we've got rocket fire from Lebanon into Israel, interceptions of missiles coming from Yemen. It feels like things could spiral out of control pretty fast.
Yeah, it's a tinderbox, no doubt. And it's crucial to remember that these events aren't happening in isolation, right?
Right.
The war in Ukraine, the growing partnership between Russia and Iran, these are all factors influencing the situation as well.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. First things first, has Iran actually crossed the nuclear threshold? I mean, what evidence beyond this seismic event that you were talking about points in that direction?
Well, while there's no official confirmation from Iran, and we probably won't get one, there are some pretty strong indications in the material that you shared. That report from the Times of Israel is very telling. They cite Israeli officials as saying that a planned strike on Iran was actually delayed because of this event.
Wow.
That suggests that even Israel, with their very sophisticated intelligence network, believes it was likely a nuclear test.
Okay, so that's actually really chilling. A potential nuclear-armed Iran.
Yeah.
What does this mean for the already volatile relationship with Israel?
Well, I mean, the situation was already incredibly tense after those recent attacks that we talked about. Both sides are threatening devastating retaliation, so the risk of miscalculation or even just a rapid escalation is now even higher. Even just the perception of a nuclear-armed Iran could lead to preemptive action by Israel, and that could potentially trigger a wider regional conflict.
And we're already seeing those ripple effects, right? Those rocket attacks from Lebanon. Over 130 of them. That's not just a random Tuesday. I mean, it seems pretty clear that Hezbollah is involved at this point, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Hezbollah, backed by Iran, is a major player in this conflict. They're a prime example of what's called asymmetric warfare, a non-state actor armed and funded by a regional power challenging a much stronger military. And they've already claimed responsibility for many of those rocket attacks, and the reports suggest they've inflicted some significant casualties on Israeli forces.
So it's not just about Iran and Israel. It's about this whole web of alliances and these proxy conflicts.
Exactly. And it's about understanding the motivations and the capabilities of each player. Hezbollah isn't just launching rockets randomly. They're responding to Israel's recent ground incursion into southern Lebanon, which itself was a response to. You see how quickly this escalates.
Yeah, it's like a dangerous game of chess with lives hanging in the balance.
Yeah, and it's a game that's being played on a global chessboard with implications far beyond the Middle East.
And speaking of that global chessboard, Russia seems to be making some pretty bold moves of their own.
Yeah.
We can't ignore the elephant, or should I say, bear in the room.
Yeah.
They're increasingly close ties to Iran, right?
Right.
Supplying them with advanced weaponry like those Su-35 fighter jets. What's going on there?
Well, it's a strategic partnership that's been deepening for a while now, but it's clearly becoming a lot more important for both sides, given their shared, let's just call them differences with the West.
Right.
Russia benefits from Iranian support, especially in its conflict with Ukraine, and in return provides Iran with the military hardware it needs to project power in their own neighborhood.
And not just hardware, though, right? I mean, you pointed out that report about Iranian pilots training in Russia to actually fly those Su-35s, and that's a pretty big deal. What kind of an advantage does that give them, especially in a potential conflict with Israel?
Yeah, it's a huge development, no question. The Su-35 is a highly capable air superiority fighter, and training Iranian pilots on it suggests a level of strategic cooperation that goes way beyond just a simple arms deal. This could significantly bolster Iran's air defense capabilities, potentially even giving them an edge over Israeli aircraft in any future conflict.
So this alliance has real teeth then. It's not just for show.
No, not at all. And it actually goes beyond military cooperation as well. You remember that analysis by Colonel Ralph Teal that you included in the materials?
Yeah.
He argues that Russia is providing Iran with not just weapons, but strategic and even political guidance. They're sharing intelligence, they're coordinating their actions, and they're very much presenting a united front against what they see as Western hostility.
So we're not just talking about two countries finding common ground. We're talking about a very deliberate attempt to reshape the global power structure here.
That's the heart of it, yeah. You've got Russia and Iran, both under sanctions, both at odds with the U.S. and its allies. They're deciding to basically create their own sphere of influence. They're challenging the U.S. dollar's dominance, strengthening those economic ties, even exploring alternative payment systems. It's about building a new world order where they set the rules.
And what does this new world order look like for, everyone else, for countries that are kind of caught in the middle of all of this?
Well, it's a very complex web, that's for sure. This new alliance has the potential to totally redraw the map, in the Middle East and even beyond. Countries like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, all with their own complicated relationships with the U.S. and its allies. They're now navigating this shifting landscape. And some of them might see this alliance as an opportunity. Others will see it as a threat. It really depends on their own individual circumstances and their allegiances.
Yeah, it sounds like we're kind of entering a period of really intense realignment, with countries having to pick sides or risk getting caught in the crossfire.
That's the danger. And nowhere is that danger more apparent than in Ukraine. The conflict there is really a microcosm of this global power struggle, with Russia challenging that established order and the West kind of struggling to figure out how to respond effectively.
You mentioned earlier that Ukraine is facing a really difficult fight, even with all of that support from the West. What does that look like on the ground?
Well, despite receiving billions in military aid from the U.S. and its allies, they are really struggling to hold back that Russian advance. I mean, the sources that you provided paint a pretty grim picture. Reports of outdated equipment, inexperienced troops, even stories of elderly men being sent to the front lines. So it's clear that Ukraine is outmatched in terms of sheer military might.
It's heartbreaking to see some of those images, knowing that there are these huge global power plays happening in the background while, there are people on the ground who are fighting and dying for their homes.
Yeah. And it's not just about conventional warfare either, right? We need to also consider the potential for things to escalate in very unpredictable and, frankly, even more horrifying ways. Do you remember that report from Sergei Naryshkin?
I do.
The head of Russia's foreign intelligence service?
Yeah.
The one claiming that Ukraine was planning a terrorist attack on the Kursk nuclear power plant?
Right. A false flag operation, basically, to try to discredit Russia and potentially even draw NATO into the conflict more directly.
Exactly. Now, whether it's a genuine threat or just disinformation, it really highlights the potential for this conflict to just spiral out of control with, potentially catastrophic consequences for the entire world. It's a stark reminder that in this kind of new age of global uncertainty, the unthinkable is becoming increasingly thinkable.
And the U.S. is kind of caught in the middle of all of this, trying to support Ukraine without triggering, a wider conflict. It's a total tightrope walk.
Yeah, the Biden administration is facing a really impossible dilemma. They've poured billions into supporting Ukraine, but they also know that direct military intervention could lead to a confrontation with Russia, potentially even a nuclear one. And now, with a potentially nuclear-armed Iran in the mix as well, the stakes are higher than ever.
You even shared a report indicating that the U.S. offered Israel some sort of compensation package to hold off on attacking Iran. Is that true? And what could they possibly even offer to deter an action like that?
The details are very scarce, but multiple sources are suggesting that the offer included security guarantees, advanced weaponry, potentially even a blind eye towards certain Israeli activities in the region.
Oh.
It really underscores just how worried the U.S. is about the potential fallout from an Israeli strike on Iran. They're trying to buy time, hoping to find some kind of diplomatic solution, but it's really unclear if they have enough leverage to prevent further escalation at this point.
It all feels incredibly precarious, like we're teetering on the edge of something truly terrifying. Is this, I hate to even ask it, but are we on the brink of a new world war?
Well, I'd say it's the most dangerous period we've seen in decades, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The potential flashpoints are numerous, from the Middle East to Eastern Europe, and the risk of miscalculation or escalation is very, very real. We're seeing a breakdown of the old rules-based order with new alliances challenging those existing power structures. It's a very volatile and unpredictable situation, and honestly, the consequences of getting it wrong are almost too frightening to contemplate.
So what do we do? What can we, as, individuals, what can we even do when faced with these enormous, seemingly unstoppable forces?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's easy to feel, I don't know, paralyzed by, the enormity of it all. Like, anything that we do on an individual level is just a drop in the ocean compared to these massive geopolitical currents we're talking about.
Yeah, it's true that these global events can often feel very distant and abstract. But the truth is the ripple effects, they touch our lives in very real and tangible ways. I mean, think about the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all feeling it. Rising energy prices, inflation at the grocery store, disruptions to global supply chains. These aren't just headlines. They're impacting our daily lives in a very real way.
So you're saying that, burying our heads in the sand is not an option.
No.
But feeling helpless isn't really productive either.
Exactly. It starts with understanding how these events are connected to our own lives. And then from there, we can start to figure out how to respond in a way that aligns with our values.
And what might that look like? Like, what could everyday people actually do?
Well, it can take many forms. Staying informed is crucial, right? And I don't mean just passively consuming headlines, but actively seeking out diverse perspectives, reliable sources, and then engaging in constructive dialogue, whether that's online or in our own communities, because that helps to challenge our own assumptions and broaden our understanding.
So more listening and less kind of shouting into the void.
Precisely. And for those who want to be more actively involved, there are always organizations that are working tirelessly for peace and justice. So supporting them, whether it's through donations or volunteering our time or even just amplifying their message, that can make a tangible difference as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I know one of the articles that you shared actually talked about how the economic crisis in Europe could really hinder NATO's ability to increase its troop presence. So could our economic decisions as individuals, like what we buy or where we invest our money, could that actually influence these global power struggles that we're discussing?
Absolutely. Economic power is a key element in any geopolitical strategy. So when we support companies that profit from conflict or invest in industries that are fueling environmental destruction, we're indirectly supporting the forces that are driving these very conflicts that we're talking about.
So it's like voting with our wallets in a way.
Exactly.
Making conscious choices that kind of reflect the world that we actually want to see.
Yeah, every purchase, every investment, it sends a message about the future that we're choosing to build.
This deep dive has been, I have to say, really eye-opening, to say the least. I came in kind of feeling overwhelmed by the news, honestly. But now I feel like at least have a better grasp of what's actually going on and what's at stake. But more importantly, I feel, a little bit more empowered to actually do something, even if it's small, to make a difference.
And that's the power of knowledge, isn't it? When we understand the forces that are shaping our world, we're just better equipped to navigate them. We can make more informed decisions and then act in accordance with our values.
Yeah, even with this newfound understanding, I think it's hard to completely shake this feeling of unease, like the world is kind of on a knife's edge.
Yeah.
One wrong move could send us spiraling into chaos.
I think that sense of unease is valid. And I think it is important to stay vigilant, to be aware of the risks and the challenges that we're facing. However, I think it's equally important to remember that we're not powerless. We have a choice. We can choose to stay informed, engage in constructive dialogue, and, as I said, support those who are out there striving for a more peaceful and just world. And those actions, as small as they may seem in the grand scheme of things, they can have a ripple effect, and they can contribute to a more hopeful future.
And that kind of brings us back to the really thought-provoking question posed in one of those articles: who are the real barbarians at the gate?
It's a question that really compels us to look beyond the surface, challenge our assumptions, consider different perspectives. Who are the forces that are truly threatening the world order? Are they these sort of external threats, like rogue states or terrorist organizations? Or are they these more insidious internal threats, the ones that kind of erode from within corruption, greed, a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion?
Yeah, it's a question with, I think, no easy answers.
Yeah.
And one that, honestly, each of us has to grapple with individually.
And that's the beauty of it, right? It's a question that sparks critical thinking. It encourages those difficult conversations. It pushes us to confront our own beliefs, our own biases.
Well, you've given us a lot to reflect on with this deep dive. Thank you, as always, for helping us make sense of this incredibly complex and ever-changing world.
The pleasure was all mine. And just remember, knowledge is power. But it only becomes truly powerful when it's shared and when it's discussed, and most importantly, when it's acted upon. So, go out there, share what you've learned, engage in those crucial conversations, because the future, however uncertain it may seem, it's still ours to shape.